The world looks to California to answer the hard questions, for redemption, to introduce the unfamiliar, to be resilient. Because California bounces back, holds us accountable, values who we are, remains vigilant, defies those in our way, and stands for community. Here on the West Coast, we're at the center of it all. Los Angeles Times, the state of what's next.
Good evening. I'm Donna Wares, editor of the LA Times Book Club. And this month, we've all been reading The Vanishing Half, Brit Bennett's new bestseller about family secrets and twin sisters whose lives take radically different paths. Brit says the novel was inspired by a story her mother mentioned when she was growing up in rural Louisiana. She starts the book in the Deep South, then moves to Los Angeles, where the characters unexpectedly collide. The result is a timely page turner that's all about race, identity, family, and belonging. The Vanishing Half follows Brit's 2016 breakout novel, The Mothers, her first book. In June, her second book, The Vanishing Half, immediately hit both the LA Times and the New York Times bestseller list and then sparked a Hollywood bidding war. Tonight, Brit Bennett will be in conversation with my colleague, Carla Hall, an editorial writer here at the Times. But first, we'll start the evening with Maria Laganga. She is a Metro reporter who would like to share her very favorite passage from The Vanishing Half. Maria, welcome back to the LA Times Book Club.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and welcome to everybody. Everyone here is reading the book in August. I read it in June because I couldn't wait for now. It was a wonderful book. I read so much about it and needed to read it. I'd read the first book that Ms. Bennett wrote, The Mothers, and loved it so much. The passage that's my favorite in this novel kind of brings together in heartbreaking fashion all of the themes that the book deals with. There are the big themes like race and justice and privilege that resonate so much today. And then the more private themes like grief and loss and loneliness. I'll be reading, the passage I'm reading is Stella, Thinking. Now, Stella and Desiree are the twins at the heart of this novel. Stella chose to live as a white woman. Desiree, her sister, chose not to. Blake, who's mentioned in this passage also, is Stella's white husband. And now I'm going to read my favorite passage on page 169 at the very bottom. It starts like this. When she'd first passed over, it seemed so easy that she couldn't believe she'd never done it before. She felt almost angry at her parents for denying it to her. If they'd passed over, if they'd raised her white, everything would have been different. No white men dragging her daddy from the porch. No laundry baskets filling the living room. She could have finished school, graduated top of her class. Maybe she would have ended up at a school like Yale, met Blake there proper. Maybe she could have been the type of girl his mother wanted him to marry. She could have had everything in her life now, but her father and mother and Desiree too. At first, passing seemed so simple. She couldn't understand why her parents hadn't done it. But she was young then. She hadn't realized how long it takes to become somebody else, or how lonely it can be living in a world not meant for you.
Thank you, Maria. That was wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Enjoy. Pleasure to have you back tonight. And now I'd like to welcome two very special guests to the LA Times Book Club, Brit Bennett and Carla Hall. Please join me on the LA Times Virtual Book Club stage. Bravo. These certainly are, well, first of all, thank you for being here. And these certainly are unprecedented times. So I wanted to start by asking you both, and I guess I'll start with Brit first. Where are you right now, Brit? And how are you keeping yourself occupied, and how are you faring during the pandemic?
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you everyone for watching. I'm in Brooklyn right now, and I've been inside for quite a while. So just keeping myself busy, working on a new project and reading and lots of Zoom. I think like everybody else, but doing as well as I can be doing, all things considered.
Thank you. And Carla, things have certainly changed for all of us at the newspaper. We've all been writing and editing and putting out the newspaper. Our staff is working from home. Can you talk a little bit about what you've been working on most recently?
Sure. I cover homelessness. And so I've been writing an editorial about how homeless people have managed not to die during COVID. there has not been a huge number of deaths among the homeless community, despite the fact that homeless people don't have homes to shelter in. So I'm writing about what went right there in terms of what the city of LA and the county of LA did, and what they should try to keep doing to keep homeless people safe.
And I also enjoyed reading some of your columns this week from the political conventions. You've been doing a little bit of that as well.
Yeah, that was fun. I wrote a blog post after Michelle Obama's speech last week, and I wrote another blog post after Kamala Harris's speech last week. And it was just an opportunity to talk about what it meant to me to hear them speak. It was great. It was fun.
I wanted to thank all of our readers. A few months ago, when all of this happened, we had to switch from live events to virtual events. And I really appreciate all of our readers, a growing number of readers who join us from home every month as we talk about amazing books like this. And I wanted to invite you from the couch while you're watching our conversation this evening. If you'd like to share some questions, we'll be doing a little Q&A with our guest author at the end of the evening. And you can share some questions at the LA Times Facebook page. Also, right now at this point, I'd like to turn the conversation over to Carla, our interviewer for this evening, and I'll be back with you ladies in just a little while.
Thanks, Donna. Brit, your book is such a mesmerizing story, and just from page one, it draws you in. So let me just say, I'm going to try not to give away too many twists and turns in the book for the people listening who have not read the whole thing. So I'll see how well I do. There's always something special and eerie about twins. And why did you decide to make your main characters twins?
Yeah, well, I think that there's something inherently interesting about twins. They factor in so much of our mythology, down to different religious beliefs, down to Greek mythology. You can always find twins sort of lurking somewhere in there. I think that they speak to questions we have about identities, about sort of shadow selves. There's obviously tropes of evil twins. There's also just a way in which I think they raise these questions about nature versus nurture. The idea of having in my case, having identical twin sisters who are raised in the same home and raised identically, in addition to sharing DNA, but end up making choices that lead them in very different directions. So I think there was a way that the idea of twins felt like a really apt way to explore some of the themes in the book, to explore these questions. I was wondering about agency and choice by using these twins as a way to think about the different paths that these two women lead their lives.
And they're so interesting because they literally become different people. And I think at one point in your book, you say it's like they just split and went off somewhere. One of the big issue as far as I'm concerned in the book is the issue of skin color, which is such a sensitive and fraught issue within Black culture. Why did you decide to take that on as a topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was something that I always thought was very interesting. The idea of colorism in a community like this. The idea of colorism is not just something that's kind of an abstract idea or a concept or a political topic, but the idea of colorism as something that is very concrete. The idea of this town that is structured around the ideology of colorism. So I always thought of this book as something that took colorism and kind of pushed it to its extremes, where it's not just a topic about how people are treating each other interpersonally, but it becomes something bigger than that. It's almost as if the town is sort of genetically engineering itself to fulfill this project of achieving light skin. There's almost like this kind of eugenics sort of project that they're doing. So I always think it's interesting if you have an idea, something that you're curious about, like to push it to its extremes, to make the most abstract concept, to make it as literal and as concrete as possible, and then to see where you can go with it. This was something that just allowed me to have an entry point into the book.
It really is an extraordinary town, and they pride themselves on hopefully intermarrying enough among the townspeople that with each successive generation, the children get lighter and lighter, even though they're still Black. So they pride themselves on being incredibly light-skinned Black people at a time when it was extraordinarily difficult, obviously, to be Black. There's so much overt racism. You say early on that the founder of the town talks about how lightness is a lonely gift, or for him, lightness is a lonely gift. I mean, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to think about or imagine the idea of where this town could have come from, and thinking about that there would be a lot of pain to me at the source of a place like this. Although this town becomes a source of pain for other people, to me, the town always traced back to this pain. So I thought about the idea of this man who feels, he feels like he has been given this gift. He's been given this privilege of his lightness, but that privilege of lightness only comes from him inheriting this history of sexual violence, this other sort of really painful racial history that he has inherited. So the sort of duality of him kind of thinking that he has received something that is special, but at the same time, because it's so special, he has to sort of preserve it. It can't be sullied. It can't be, tarnished by him marrying someone who's dark. So I wanted to, think about the idea of tracing colorism to its roots, which is the roots are white supremacy. The roots are white racist violence. So I didn't want to position this town as if it were just some Black people who believed strange things. I wanted to think about where that belief comes from and the pain that it comes from, even as the town then turns out to be a source of pain for the other characters that live there.
And also, if they were thinking that somehow looking as light as possible would save them from the other racism that Black people who are not as light experience, it sort of didn't happen because as the situation with Stella and Desiree's father indicates, who was brutally murdered.
Right.
So there's still a lot of pain, yet they keep going on with the town.
Right. Right. There's the idea of these characters pursuing lightness for its own sake. It's not the same as, a book like Negroland by Margot Jefferson, which is about a lot of light-skinned Black communities in Chicago, but these are wealthy, light-skinned Black people. These are doctors and lawyers who associate their light skin with also their class aspirations and their wealth and the privilege that they amass in that way. But this is not a town like that. This is a community of people who are poor people. They live in this farm town. They are still like being light skinned does not actually give them any tangible sort of benefits they're hoping to achieve, and yet they still pursue it doggedly because that is the end to itself. And to me, I think so much of this book for me was sort of peeling back the absurdities of race and thinking about the sort of absurdity of this type of belief that these characters are wholeheartedly pursuing lightness for its own sake, and that is the end in itself. And thinking just about how absurd that is, but also how very real I think in a lot of ways it is.
And you're right, because I mean, Stella and Desiree's mother, washes people's houses, so it's not like she, used it to become something more upper class.
Right.
Stella, one of the twins who disappears, started passing as white just to get a decent job. And what I thought was interesting is that she didn't so much fear that white people would figure it out because she says like they're easy to fool. She feared that Black people would figure it out. And there's a great line in the book where Stella's mother tells her, we always know our own. By the way, I've heard that my entire life, and I've usually found that to be true. However, I confess I did not realize that Meghan Markle was Black until the day she was engaged to Harry, and it was written about. So, but there's several places where to sort of keep going with this ruse about being white, where Stella not just has to act white, but she has to be brutally hostile to Black people around her just to protect her made-up image. Was she, do you see that? Do you see her as being unethical? It's like she had to become a racist herself.
Yeah. I don't know. I I try not to judge any of these characters or try to read them in that lens. But I do think what I found interesting about Stella, I think in particular, is that she is this character who is constantly sort of feeling hunted, that she's constantly hiding. I had someone describe her once as a fugitive, and that felt accurate of the way that she moves through the world. So you have that sense of her, and she feels that she has to sort of overcompensate by pushing any Black person away out of fear that they are going to discover, her background or discover her heritage in some way. So there's a way in which I think I understand that, her making that choice and feeling like she has to protect herself sort of preemptively, because she's not worried about white people discovering. She feels like white people are easy to fool, and if you just walk into a room with all of the confidence in the world, no one's going to question you. So I think she has this sort of reaction out of fear of trying to protect this new world that she's built, because if that world comes tumbling down, then what is she really left with? She really has nothing left, because she sort of burned the bridge to her family in Mallard, and then has this new family. And if she gets cast out of that, then she has nothing. So I understand that, but at the same time, I do think it's important that these are choices that she is making. She is choosing to, become this sort of, to sort of leverage all of the privileges she has of whiteness to protect the world that she's built for herself. These are all things that she is actively choosing, and I feel like that's important to factor in, even as I find myself sort of understanding that kind of fight or flight reflex that she has in these moments. She's choosing all of this, and she's standing in these choices.
And sometimes I understood her choices, and I understood her fear and her loneliness. And other times where she's really awful, I'm appalled. And, I mean, what do you want as readers? What do you want us to think? How do you want us to judge her? Or what do you want us to conclude about her?
I think I worried the most about Stella as I was writing her, because I knew that she is a character that I think a lot of readers are going to, at the very least, distrust, if not outright hate. I don't think I've talked to a lot of people who've just been like, I hate her. There've been a lot of people who want to fight her, or people who've been otherwise very frustrated with her, which is understandable. But I think I knew that there was a lot at stake, because she's one of the main characters in the book. She makes choices that a lot of readers are not going to agree with. And to me, the biggest thing was that even if you don't agree with her choices, I want you to understand why she's making them, and I want you to understand what she is telling herself of why she is making that choice. To me, that is the most important thing. And for myself as well, I think there are a lot of ways in which I found it difficult at times to cheer for Stella any real way. There are a lot of times in which she frustrated and confounded me as well. But I wanted to approach her with empathy and understanding, even if it's not justifying anything that she does, but just understanding the choices she makes. And I think she is somebody who creates herself. And I think that there's something, my most generous reading of Stella is that there's something so liberating in this idea of just taking full agency over your life and creating yourself. And I think she kind of has that moment in the book where at first she sort of, kind of acts like she just sort of got pulled into this life. And then eventually there's a moment that's like, no, I actually decided everything. And I think that that's a really important moment to just realize, even if you regret your choices, not that I think she regrets them, but even if you do, as long as you can stand in the pride and say that you chose what you chose, I think that's a fine way to live your life.
And she does, for the most part. There were a few times, there was one time in the book where she says, well, I got forced into this. And I thought, no, you didn't. You chose this. Exactly. And I think most of the time she owns those choices. That whole idea, though, of people pretending, and you read mostly about it, I think, or hear mostly about it with Black people pretending to be white, particularly in a racist society where obviously being white seems to carry more more insulation than being Black, certainly back in the time period when in the 50s and the 60s and then into the 70s when Desiree and Stella were making these choices. But it does seem that we do tend to punish and judge people who lie about race. And I was thinking about how one of the more famous recent cases of this was where a white woman passed as Black, the woman Rachel Dolezal, who said she was Black and she became an NAACP chapter president, all of which she had to give up. Why are we so damning of that? Like you said, it's people recreating themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly funny. This is, I think, the first time Rachel Dolezal has come up and talking to someone about this book, which I thought she would be like a specter haunting this book. So this is the first time she has emerged. I think in that particular case, I think that there was something so. I think that part of the reaction was sort of an incredulity of why would a white person choose Blackness. There was that sort of weird undercurrent of it that I found so I don't know. I found strange. I found that sort of element of why would she want this? Like you understand why a white person would or why a Black person would pass as white, but you can't wrap your mind around why a white person would do. So there was that undercurrent of it, which I think spoke to some of it. But I think the thing that thinking about that event and that whole narrative in connection with the book. There was, I think, an op-ed by Allison Hobbs who wrote this book called Chosen Exile, which was one of the books that I found really instructive in thinking about racial passing. And she said something in the op-ed to the fact that Rachel Dolezal told a lie about what is already a fiction, and the fiction is already race. So there was something about that really is kind of lodged in my brain and thinking about Stella in this way of she tells a lie about what's already a fiction. Fiction is the construct of race and these categories. At one point in the book, Stella asks, well, why is this person white and I'm not? And she doesn't really get a good answer, but it is a legit question. Like what makes her Black? What makes this person white if they look exactly the same? There is an inherent sort of absurdity to these racial categories that we place a lot of stock in. They carry real meaning. They influence our lives in these very real and tangible ways. But at the same time, there's something inherently flimsy about them. And I think that's the thing that I kept thinking about is she told a lie about what was already fiction. And I think that's how I think about Stella is that she told a lie, but these categories and what they mean and all of that is already make believe. These are things that we ascribe to and we assign meaning to, and then we assign real life consequences to them. But the idea of what makes me white and what makes this person Black, that is not something that is clear cut. So that is, I think, the way in which I that helped me, I think, get another entryway into the book and into thinking about Stella's journey.
No, you're absolutely right. And in fact, I think you told an interviewer, I believe Linnell George, when she was interviewing you, she who writes for us sometimes, I think you told her that we think of identity categories with much more fluidity now. And I mean, that's pretty much exactly what you're talking about, that this whole idea of what you are genetically or ethnically is becoming much less distinct.
Yeah, I mean, I think the book is set in the Jim Crow South, which is very much a system of binaries. There's the colored drinking fountain, there's the white drinking fountain.
Yeah.
Which one are you? And I think that for me, thinking about writing a story about passing, I'm writing from my perspective as a young writer in the 21st century, and the ways in which I, even just thinking about multiculturalism and thinking about the idea that you don't have to force yourself into one category or the other. That to me, I think really influenced the way I thought about this story. So when I took a step back, I thought to myself, well, what does it even mean to pass if we start at the standpoint that these categories are fluid. What does passing mean then? What does it mean if we start with the assumption that categories can be unstable, that they can change, that they're unclear, that you can't, that we don't always know our own, that you can see somebody and not think, and so much of that is Stella's journey is she walks in a room and somebody reads her a different way and she kind of goes with it. What does that mean? So I wanted to think about the fluidity of all of that, and compared to the time in which the book is set and the sort of rigidity that these characters are moving within, thinking about what this looks like if we assume that these categories are more fluid, or if we have a language to allow these categories to be more fluid, because they have, of course, always been fluid. We just haven't had the language, and we haven't had the laws, and we haven't had sort of all of that infrastructure to support the inherent fluidity of what it means to be alive.
Yeah, yeah. Have you ever known anyone who passed in your real life?
I mean, there's of course family lore. There are, family stories. But I definitely, I know people who have passed from moment to moment for sure. The idea of, that the moment of like, yeah, you go into a store and someone treats you better because they think you're white, so you go with it. Like those types of things. That I've known people to do that, but I've also known people like, family friends and family members that I've encountered that I did not correctly read their race, or I thought they were something else. I think there's always something so interesting about that of how people read you versus how you present versus how you read yourself versus all of those sort of questions. So I think it's something that is such a complicated topic, and one that I did not want to deal with in a way that was punishing, because I felt that by punishing Stella, you're sort of upholding white supremacy in a way. You're upholding the idea that whiteness is something that is so precious that Stella stole it, and therefore she should be punished for doing that. When in fact, again, you were working with these sort of fluid and unstable and confounding categories that everybody is dealing with, trying to see themselves within, and that to me is not something that should be punished.
That is interesting that you said you've known people who from moment to moment
Sure.
may have passed. And you're right, a lot of it's just reading, like, do they think I'm, well, whatever, or
Right.
them, you understand I'm X, or something.
Right.
You also use the terminology passing on, like they passed on. They went from the black world to the white world or something. I always heard it as passing. Did you specifically, is that a historic terminology, passing on, or did you mean to make it sound like people dying and going into another world?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely some language that I encountered was, passing over, which is, obviously sounds a lot like dying and going into another world. And I think another thing that I just realized thinking about this book and writing it was the idea of passing in the way that Stella does it, which is this sort of completely leaving behind everyone you knew and loved.
Yeah.
There's a way in which that becomes a type of spiritual death, I think, for her. So I thought about the idea of death faking, almost what she does. The idea of her completely leaving behind all the people she cared about who love her and disappearing into this new world. So I thought there was something interesting in the language, kind of echoing that sentiment. But I think there is a lot of sort of ghostliness in this book. There's a feeling of ghosts kind of lingering, and Stella being this sort of lingering ghost who's kind of haunting everyone, although she has gone to some other world. And that was something that I just stumbled upon in language as I was reading about it, and I found a really interesting echo.
Wow, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it was like she experienced a spiritual death. A number of the characters make their way to Los Angeles. Why? Because it's a place to reinvent yourself?
I think that's part of it. Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think, I don't know that I ever thought of myself as a California writer per se until I think probably working on this book, and I realized how important, you know, sort of the mythology of California is, I think, to my work in a lot of different ways. My first book was set in Oceanside, which is where I grew up, and it was set there because that was where I grew up. And in this book, I was really interested in the idea I knew immediately that Stella would end up in California. That's LA. That's where you go to reinvent yourself. It's a city that is known for make believe and pretend and costumes and performance. And this book is very much about characters performing in a lot of different ways. There's sort of the myth of the West in general, of going west to seek your fortune, or going west to start over in some way. So there was that kind of sort of tenor of that mythology that appealed to me. I think I've also just sort of personally always been interested in the idea of Black people migrating from the South to California, which was the migration that my family did. It wasn't the Great Migration north to Chicago, or these sort of industrial cities that most people think of. It was that kind of second Great Migration after World War II of my grandma came from Arkansas. The family members eventually ending up in LA in that way. So there were a lot of reasons like that I found LA a really fun place for these characters to congregate. And I think also just logistically, it's exactly the type of city where two people could bump into each other at a party and never see each other again, and that's entirely feasible. that would happen, that you could have this chance encounter that changes your life and never have any expectation of running into that person ever
I know it's I'm always shocked when I run into anyone I know.
again.
This seems so vast. And I was going to say that you grew up in Oceanside. You went to Stanford, then you went to an MFA program at University of Michigan. And in fact, we may have a photo. There you are. And so where are you in this group of lovely girls?
Yeah, I'm the very happy and spoiled youngest child in the middle there. Those are my two older sisters and one of three. And I think, as you can tell from the book, sisterhood is a theme that's really important to me, but I've always been very close to my sisters.
Yeah, and you remain close to them, right? Still now?
Yes, I do. I just saw them over the summer in LA, so it was really good to see them again after so long.
And so all this time, your books have a nexus in California, your family, your school. Why are you living in New York?
I moved out here last fall. I had a couple teaching gigs that I was doing out here. And I think, just I had never lived in New York and was kind of ready to switch it up. I had been in California for most of my life. So I was ready to do something different. But I found this to be true when I was in Michigan for grad school. But I always feel weirdly more connected to writing about California when I'm not physically there. There's a way in which, I don't know if it's a homesickness or a nostalgia or anything like that, but there's a way in which I feel like writing about California feels more present and more vibrant for me when I'm not there and I'm thinking about it. And that was, I think, the first time I realized that was when I lived in Michigan. That was the first time I'd lived outside of the state. But nothing like a Michigan winter that is going to make you think very fondly on growing up in a beach town in California.
I had the reverse experience. I grew up in Chicago and lived on the East Coast and eventually came out here. And now I can't imagine going back to live there.
Can't do the other direction.
So I feel for anyone who grew up here and then in the Midwest or on the East Coast. Maybe it's because you had like some perspective when you got out of California. You could see it in a slightly different way.
I think so. I think there's a lot you take for granted, and particularly for me with the mothers, there were so many things that were very particular about growing up in Oceanside that I did not think of in that way until I left. The idea of having like surf PE was a class that you could take, and then I'd be talking to friends and they'd be like, wait, what? That was a PE class that you guys did at your school? There are things like that, or just, going to the beach and seeing Marines everywhere and these sort of very particular details of place. I think that those things become sharper to you once you have physically left and you're kind of thinking back on them and realizing every place is not like this. There's something very special and different about this place.
Do you surf?
I do not surf. No, I never took surf PE. But I do miss the beach. I was able to go to the beach in Santa Barbara. Their beaches were still open while I was in California, so I was able to go to the beach and enjoy it very briefly when I was in California.
So, I mean, despite the fact that you've had extraordinary writing success and you've had it early, and you sounds like you were starting to have it at Stanford. You had people who mentored you and encouraged you to go on and keep writing. Your parents hoped you'd go to law school, didn't they?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's, I don't know. I don't know how many parents want to hear from their kids that, they want to write a novel. I don't know if that's anybody's like shining hope for their child. So I know for my parents, they didn't want me to be a starving artist. They wanted me to get a real job. And to them, like that was something that would have been a real job, was go to law school, have a real career, and then you can do your writing thing on the side. That was what they were trying to pitch to me. And I think for me, a lot of it was just, I graduated college kind of during the recession. And it seemed like nobody was really getting hired anyway. So I just figured I would go to do this MFA program, and maybe by the time I get out, the economy will be better. And that was kind of my justification. And fortunately for me, the writing has proven to be working and has proven to be a viable career. So my parents are now very pleased.
I'll say. Well, that's good. And your father is a lawyer, right? So
He is, yes.
And I think we have a photo of you and your mom and your two sisters. Your sisters, you are all lovely looking and love the dresses. Where are you in this?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm in sort of third from the left. I'm standing next to my mom and my sister Jenna. This was us at a wedding last Labor Day. Remember weddings, everybody.
Oh.
It was I think the last wedding I've been to. So it was great to be able to spend that time with everybody before I was in New York.
And your sisters are still here in California?
Yeah, they're in Northridge.
Okay. So, and The Vanishing Half, you worked on for years, right? I mean, Mothers came out in 2016, I think, and you were already working on The Vanishing Half when The Mothers came out, right?
Yeah. I started it about 2015. It was kind of that weird time between when you have finished a book, but before the book has come out. So I wasn't working on it, but it hadn't been released yet. And I wanted to do something to sort of turn my anxiety away from my first book coming out. So I started working on The Vanishing Half, and yeah, it took a while to kind of shape. It was a difficult book to figure out how to put together.
It's got so many layers. Tell me how your mother inspired the idea of the book.
Yeah, it came from a conversation I had with her. And I don't remember really what we were talking about, but she was telling me about a town that she remembered hearing about from her childhood growing up in rural Louisiana. And it was a town where, all these Black people were intermarrying so that their children would get lighter. And there was always something really disturbing about that idea, but immediately I felt like that was a setting for a novel.
Did you let her read any of it along the way, just to make sure that, okay?
No, absolutely not. I show my family once we have galleys, like once the book is what it is, then I show it to them. But no, I don't show it to my friends really. I have a few friends I'll show early drafts to. But yeah, I don't show it to my family. I feel like that would make me very self-conscious. So I show it to them once I have decided what it is.
And were you had so much well-deserved success with your first novel. Were you worried? I mean, did you feel a lot of pressure to have the second one measure up, which of course it has?
Thank you. I felt a little bit. I think, like I said, it was a difficult novel to put together. And I felt the sort of challenge of that. I wanted to do something that was going to be very different than The Mothers. But at the same time, I felt very in over my head a lot of times as I was working on this book. And that being said, I also knew I didn't want to write in a way that felt self-conscious. but I also knew that I wanted to do something that was different than the mothers. But I also did not want to disappoint the people who liked the mothers. So I felt like I was kind of on that tightrope a little bit at some points writing it. And eventually I had to learn how to just get out of my own way, and how just to allow this book to be what it was going to be.
And that's a big thing for writers, just like stop self-editing kind of and just keep
Yeah.
going.
I think so. You can't get anything done if you self-edit in that way, and it's obviously easier said than done. But I had to just sort of reach a point of just thinking about what's ahead, not worrying about what I did before, just thinking about that feeling that you chase as a writer, which is getting a sentence on the page that you're proud of, or getting a coming up with a moment or beat or line of dialogue or something that gives you that spark of joy. I wanted to take that pressure off of myself that I was sort of putting on in the beginning, and just lean into that sense of playfulness that you get when you're creating something. I wanted to always be chasing that feeling.
What did you mean that you felt at one point like you were in over your head?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like that at a lot of points. I think for this book, I began to realize that it was going to be a very different book than The Mothers. The Mothers is, a fairly linear coming of age story. You meet the characters when they're in their teenager years, and then about 10 years pass, and that's where you leave them. So there's a linearity to it. It's kind of contained as a story. You have these three main characters that you're kind of with the whole time. And this was very quickly proving to be very different than that. Like, I knew that it was going to be set over decades. It wasn't going to be something contained in time. I knew that I realized it was going to be multi-generational, that I was going to have all of these different characters that I was going to have to bounce between all of their perspectives. And then eventually I realized that it was not going to be chronological. So I had all those different elements that I was kind of juggling, and trying to figure out. So in addition to any type of external pressure about expectations for the book, I also felt all the internal pressure of just trying to figure out how to write this book that I was kind of had in my mind that I didn't know how to write, because I had never written a book like that before. But I think it was once I realized that, once I was finally like, okay, you have never done this book before, so it's going to be challenging, and you're going to have to take time to figure it out, and you're going to have to lean on the people that you trust to help you, and you're also going to have to trust yourself. I had to reach that point of doing that. And eventually, after 4 years or whatever, of all of this, eventually, we got it
It feels very organic. I know when I started reading it, I was into it before I realized, oh, we're sort of going back and forth, but that's okay, because you would have something happen and then we would go to another character, and I think, well, that's fine because I want to read about them. So
done.
I think you obviously made it work.
Thank you.
So there was a huge Hollywood bidding war for this book at the beginning of the summer. What was that like for you?
Surreal. It was as surreal as anyone can imagine. You're sort of, again, in quarantine in your apartment, just taking phone call after phone call. And
who were the phone calls from? Your agent, or saying how things are going, or what?
No, it was with all of the interested parties. So everybody wants to pitch to you why they want to be the ones to make it. And all of these are incredible and talented people. And I just felt, I felt very overwhelmed. I didn't think that we were going to end up in that situation. I thought, we'd have maybe a few people that were interested that we would choose between. And then it turned out, it just kept sort of snowballing of more people wanting to put in, to sort of plead their case. So it was completely surreal. But I couldn't be more thrilled that we landed at HBO. I think that they make incredible television, and particularly they make great adaptations. And I think that I just could not have been happier to land there.
And what was it that whoever it was from HBO, what was it that made you want them? Was there something they said that secured the deal for you?
I think it was a lot of things that they said. I think they have a lot of selectivity to what they make, and because of that, they can pour a lot of resources and prioritize their projects because they don't, produce nonstop projects. So that was something that really appealed to me. I think it was really just also the enthusiasm of the team, the vision, the fact that they understood what the book was about and what the book could be on the screen. A lot of those things, and obviously just the legacy of HBO and all of the great programming that they make. So there were a lot of things. We had so many amazing, interesting people that all of them I'm sure would have been a dream to work with. But I'm very happy that we landed at HBO.
And it's going to be a series, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a series. And we're in the beginning stages of discussing what it could look like and how long and all of these things. But it's going to be a television series.
Because that does make sense the the sort of the long history. I mean, the saga that you unveil in the book. It does seem like it would lend itself to a series as opposed to just a 2.5 hour movie.
Yeah.
Like you really have some time to develop plots and characters and see how characters grow and change and stuff like that. And are you going to be an executive producer on it? Did I read that too?
I will be, yes. So I'm not adapting, but contributing, consulting, weighing in, helping in whatever ways I can outside of writing it. I'm leaving that to the professionals.
Okay, but who would you like to see cast in it?
I never have a good answer for this because I think when I was writing the book, I only thought of it as a novel. I never had sort of a dream cast in mind. I never imagined that we would be in the situation where we're even talking about casting it. So I don't have a dream cast in mind, but I'm excited to see the show that will be cast in a diverse way that will have lots of Black actors that will truly encompass this diversity of our community. I'm excited to see that on television.
I am too. I kept thinking about Jennifer Beals because
yeah, she's great.
Quite light skinned.
Yes.
So, but there are obviously a huge number of talented people who could be in it. So let me just sort of pull back a little bit and talk about the time that we're in. Besides the quarantine that we're in, we're also in this time of extraordinary social reckoning in the wake of George Floyd's death. I mean, how do you feel about what you see going on around you in terms of that social reckoning, and how does it affect you as a novelist and also as an essayist?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm still wrapping my mind around a lot of it. I find it hard to react to anything in the moment, especially like I told myself I was going to, write some type of a journal or something during quarantine. Like I have not written a single thing about the quarantine. I just could not bring myself to even chronicle a second of it. So it's so difficult for me to make meaning of a moment while we're in the middle of it. And I feel the same way about this period of reckoning, as people are calling it. I think that is something that has to be sort of earned. I think that is something that only time will tell whether there has actually been a reckoning, or whether it has been sort of a phase of quarantine, a thing that people were briefly interested in, and then they moved on to sourdough bread or whatever people are doing in the quarantine. I think that's the most cynical maybe reading of it, and I don't consider myself a cynic. I think that there have been some tangible moments of change that are certainly things I never thought I would see. There have been, but that being said, a lot of those moments of change are symbolic. And I think to me, the question is, how do we move beyond the symbolic to structural and systemic change? As sort of, think of something like Mississippi, taking the Confederate flag out of their state flag, or, all of these moments. I'm not trying to downplay the significance of those things, because lots of people, like lots of Black people in Mississippi, are like, I never thought I would see that, So there are things like that have shown that something has shifted. But But I think for me, I think what is yet to be determined is just whether these shifts are going to actually become systemic change and whether those changes will be long lasting, and not just people sort of patting themselves on the back for doing the kind of easy symbolic thing.
No, it is. It is a concern, and I mean, I've certainly never seen so much change happen in the last, I don't know, 30 years or something, or 40 years even. And I know certainly at my newspaper there are a lot of things that are changing, and there's a great commitment to diversify the newsroom and also to diversify the coverage that we undertake. And you hope that that will be long lasting, and that it's not, like you said, like a fad, like, and then you go on to making sourdough bread. Do you see, has anything that has happened? And also, while there continues to be so much violence, I mean, as we saw in Wisconsin, there's still, unfortunately, going to be incidents that keep sparking people's interest in hammering on institutions like the police department to change. But does this at all affect any of your plans as a writer? I mean, notwithstanding the quarantine journal, do you think about trying to write any essays about this, or any kind of longer reported stories, which I know you can do? Just wondering if suddenly any of that interested you.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few. There are a few essays that I have thought about, but again, I felt I don't know. I've been working on a project during quarantine that is a project I had been working on for a few years. I haven't started anything new now, and the idea of doing that, it feels very daunting.
Yeah.
Just sort of in this headspace. But there are a few essays that I have been thinking about, of sort of longer essays of trying to make sense of this moment. But again, like I said, I find it so difficult to write from within. And even now I think about, like, thinking about June, that feels like a lifetime ago,
Yeah.
where in a way, and in another way, it feels like it was last night, because again, you're, logging on to Twitter another day and you're reading about another murder. So there is that weird sort of collapsing and contracting of time, that feels like something that I'm still trying to make sense of. So it's something that I would like to write about some point. But I think between the pandemic and also just the nonstop Zoom of virtual book tour, I do feel like my brain has disintegrated a little bit, and I don't know that I'm capable right now to do it. But I have a few things of my sort of, the opposite of a hot take will be like 3 years from now, me writing something about the summer. Like, remember, guys, when that happened? That's entirely something I could see myself doing.
Well, and it will be worth waiting for and reading.
Thank you.
The book is doing really well, weeks on the bestseller lists of the New York Times and the LA Times. Have you, I think I heard you say earlier that you had yet to go to an actual bookstore because they're not open and because we have to socially distance. Have you been doing all your book events like this on Zoom and on TV?
Yeah, I haven't been to an actual store and seen the book in the wild yet. But yeah, I've been doing a lot of virtual events. I've been doing lots of Zoom things, Instagram lives, and it's been fun. There's something nice about being able to do these events and roll into your bed, not having to be on planes and sleeping in hotels and living out of your suitcase. But the flip side, I do really miss out on actually meeting readers face to face and going to dinner with booksellers and going to see your friends that live in various cities when you're traveling there. I miss all of those aspects of the physical book tour too. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that we will be in a touring world again someday, not too distant future.
And certainly when the series comes out, hopefully.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, that would definitely be nice.
Tour for that. So that actually brings me to my last question, which is, what are you working on now, to the extent that you can tell us about that?
Yeah, I'm working on the third novel, and it's still very, very early. But it's a novel about two divas who have a lifelong feud. And it's been really fun to escape into that world, a world of glamour and excess, in a time in which, there isn't much of those things, in a time in which you're just like sitting in in your apartment, and imagining a world of parties and, premieres and all of these things. So it's been really fun. It's very different than the world of Vanishing Half. But it's been really fun to have something else to focus on and to direct your creative energy towards, and particularly a world that is one that you want to escape into.
Oh, I already love it. I mean, you had me at two divas. So I can't wait to read it. It sounds fantastic. How long have you been working on that?
I started it in 2018, so a couple years. But like I said, still I wrote a monstrous draft during 14 when I was descending into the depth of my solitude. And the book just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more unwieldy. So eventually, my poor editor is going to have to take a look at it and try to make some sense of it. But for what it's worth, I'm having fun doing it. So that's good.
Then that's important. That's important.
Yes.
Well, I'm pretty sure that Donna has questions from people who've been submitting questions like online, like all day, right?
Yeah, so we've had quite a few questions, and I promise I won't overwhelm you. We're just going to pull out a few because Carla covered so many topics that people have been asking about. But I do have a few questions. Our first question comes from a reader named Margaret, and she asks, I'd love to hear more about how you referenced and incorporated the concept of sacred twins.
Yeah, that was sort of, I think, speaking a little bit to Carla's earlier question about why twins. As I was thinking about this book, I kept thinking about some of the mythology of twins. And the Marasa, that was one sort of religious belief about twins and this idea of these being child gods who must be worshipped equally. And there was something about that felt really resonant to the idea of these twins, that this expectation that falls on, I think, parents in general, but I think especially parents of twins, who often feel that you have to treat your twins exactly the same. And I kept thinking how unreasonable that is. It seems to me, at least, I'm not a parent, but that seems unreasonable to expect that you treat any two people exactly the same. So when I stumbled upon that idea, the spiritual idea, that felt like something that resonated with the sort of impossible situation that the mother of these twins sort of found herself in, and it leads to her sort of blaming herself, almost feeling guilty, like it was her inability to treat her children exactly the same that led to them scattering off into the world in these very different directions.
Well, thank you. So our next question comes from Patricia, and she's another, we have a LA Times Book Club Facebook group. And her question is, the book never explains the reason or history behind Desiree and Stella's father's murder. Is there a reason that you left that vague?
I think that you get a sense of why he's killed, but there is a senselessness to that murder, and that was important to me. The idea that this is a person who is murdered senselessly, as we see all the time, as we were just talking about the senseless murder of Black people in this country. So he is murdered senselessly, and you get the sense of Stella in particular trying to make logical sense out of it. She has a very logical brain, and even from a young child, she cannot put the pieces together that explain why he was killed. And that's something that really haunts her. She's not willing to sort of accept that this is a reality of Black life, that your life can be stolen from you for no reason. She can't make sense of that logic. So that was always important to me, was to think about this really brutal murder that the twins witness, and think about the ways in which that also sort of casts a shadow over their adult lives, even as they grow up and leave Mallard.
Thank you. As a former police reporter, that resonates very well because so many murders like that are exactly that, senseless. There's never any answers and good reasons
Right.
why it happens. Um, our next question comes from a reader named David, who this one he came by email, and he wants to say, first of all, I love your novels. What is your pre-writing planning process? Do you know each major plot point beat before you begin the actual writing? And he finishes his questions with a little atta girl who says, "Keep up the great work."
Thank you.
Let's go back to the question.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that affirmation. It depends. No, I don't know the major plot points or beats. That's definitely a no. I'm very much somebody who figures out things as I go. I don't outline even. I just try to chase the story, what feels fun and what feels exciting to me. Um, there are some, books that The Vanishing Half is one that I did some research beforehand, and this new diva book. I've read lots and lots of books about divas, which has been truly amazing. So there are some books where I do some element of research beforehand, but for me, all I need to know really is I want to know where I'm going to start. And for all of my books, I've known exactly where I wanted to start. I never know where I'm going to end, but I know where I want to start, and I usually know where I want to go about halfway through the book, and I just think about it in that way. But beyond that, I'm just really, I love drafting. I love the idea of not knowing where I'm going, not knowing what's going to happen next. Just being kind of the kid in the sandbox and you're moving the toys around. Like that's the feeling that I want to have. So I don't outline because that feels too much like homework to me. I want to just sort of spend time in that sandbox. So I have a very sort of circuitous and messy writing process. But the things that I want to know before, I want to know, a bit about the main characters and a bit about where I want to go with the story, and then try to figure out the rest as I go.
Thank you.
I wanted to say, so when you started writing this, you were sort of taking that journey with Stella and Desiree, and you didn't know where they were going when you first started, when you made them leave town.
No, not at all. I knew that the middle point of the book would be the stories beginning to collide in some way. So that was the point that I was writing towards from the beginning, and I knew the beginning would be Desiree returning with Jude. So I had that sense, but no, I was just figuring out as I go, which, like I said, is part of the reason why I think I felt very much in over my head a lot of times throughout the book because I was trying to orient myself and discover. But I think that process of discovering alongside the characters that feels fun to me, and that's what I enjoy. I think in drafting.
We have one more question, and I'll leave it at this because really we could keep you here all night. But this one comes from Cindy, and this was also we have a very active book club Facebook group that loves to talk about the books we're reading. And Cindy says, I found Reese, the character Reese, who is also, I found a very interesting character. I found Reese totally fascinating and appreciating the normalizing acceptance of his physical transition. It took courage to write this. What inspired you to include a trans character in the story?
Well, thank you. I don't find it particularly courageous. I think because for myself writing it, as a cisgender person, I think that I have very little at risk. Unlike the ways in which there are a lot of trans writers out there who are struggling to even get published because of their identities. So I felt that I was risking little by doing it. But I am glad that you enjoyed the character. I think Reese is the character that readers talk to me about the most, and the character that readers really, really love. And for me, I loved the character. He was a character that I had been thinking about. I had written a short story with him when I was in grad school. So he was sort of a character that was kind of hovering in the back of my mind a little bit. And when I started to think about Jude and her escaping Mallard, and I wanted her to have this big sweeping love story, Reese just popped into my mind as this character that I really loved, and it was a little like matchmaking in a sense of these two fictional characters of thinking about what would they be like in a relationship together. And that was kind of the first way I thought about him. And then later I thought about the ways in which the thematics of his story are really different than the thematics of Stella, and that those tensions could be really fruitful and interesting. So I wanted to tell this story. I always thought of it as kind of the romantic heart of the book. And it's been really, I think, exciting to hear from trans readers, to hear from cisgender readers, to hear from readers, in all types of genders, and all types of sexualities and everything, to hear people responding and so warmly embracing this character.
What's really interesting about that character is he's also beloved by the other characters in the book, whether they know his story or not. They just
Yeah.
like him. They like him for who he is.
Yeah.
And just a really interesting, one of many interesting characters in the book. So one of the things, well, I wanted to thank you both. I mean, this was such a fascinating conversation. But for every book club event, when we do them live, we always invite a bookseller to join us. So we can do a book signing and people can get signed books. And we didn't want to get rid of that experience, even though we've missed virtual. So we have a bookstore partner this evening. It is Chevalier's Books. And they have signed copies of your book available for this book club event. So if people want a special edition from our book club read, it is certainly available there. And we like to work with book club independent booksellers across LA for each of our book club events. So I just like to throw in that brief commercial because that's really important. And then the other thing I like to mention is where I like to invite people to sign up for our book club newsletter. People always say, when's the next event? What's your book club news? Well, sign up for our newsletter. And that is latimes.com/book club. And you'll be in the loop and you can know whatever we're reading. And we share all kinds of news. We have so much amazing book coverage that comes from our new book editor. And, we just are always talking books. So, and then we get very lucky that every month we can convene an event like this. As we wrap up, though, this summer we're all reading, and I don't know about you, but I'm always reading books for work, but then I have the books that I just dive into for my own. Books are always my escape too. So I'm reading a lot of historical fiction, just escape. I'm catching up on Lisa C., which is just amazing. She's a legendary LA writer whose books are just tremendous. So I want to ask each of you a final question from me. What book are you reading this summer? And Carla, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I actually am going to go back and read The Mothers now that I've read The Vanishing Half. And I so loved your book. I really did, Brit. So I'm happy to go back in time and read your first one. But the other thing I'm reading is Finding Freedom, the book about Harry and Meghan, because I'm fascinated by royalty. I have no way to justify it. I just find them fascinating.
And they're also our neighbors now. They've moved to Southern California, first LA and Santa Barbara. So
talk about running into people. I keep hoping to run into them. I have really good friends in Montecito. Whenever we get out from under quarantine, I hope I can go to Montecito to visit my friends and run into Harry and Meghan. So
there you go.
So, Brit, what book, aside from The Vanishing Half, we've all read that this summer. That's our number one book. But what book did you read that you really escaped into the summer or that you would recommend to our book club readers?
Yeah, I guess keeping on this theme a little bit of fame or famous people, I read Actress by Anne Enright, which I love that book. It's about it's a novel about the daughter of a Irish theater legend. And their sort of complicated and claustrophobic mother-daughter relationship. I've always been really fascinated of the idea of what's it like to be, the daughter of somebody super famous. What is the way in which you relate to that person versus the way strangers relate to them and all of that. So it's a book about intimacy, fame. It's about gender, the travails of this famous woman who's eventually has this sort of tragic life. So I really loved that book. I think there's an escapist element to it. You get to, escape into this sort of world of this theater legend in a way that was really beautiful and tragic and also fun.
And so go ahead. Did you want to jump in, Carla?
No, I just wrote it down. I'll go look for it and put that on my list as well.
And so, Carla, this is the first time Carla has been out in front. She is usually, a lot of times, particularly for our live events, we do these amazing videos. And Carla, aside from being a great writer, is also a voice talent. So she usually does our voice for our events. So I was so thrilled that this is the first time Carla has been an interviewer. And I get really lucky because we have so much talent in the LA Times newsroom. I wanted to thank Maria Laganga, who has, she came and did a noir night for us. She's been a pop-up reader. And there's so many people across our newsroom that share our time and talents and suggest books to me all the time. And this was certainly a popular pick. A lot of people were really thrilled that we chose this, both inside the newsroom and out. And you are a special guest star tonight, Brit. Is there any question that we forgot to ask you, or is there any parting comment that you'd like to make before we close up for the evening?
No, I just want to thank the LA Times Book Club for having me. Thank you for choosing The Vanishing Half. And thank you for everyone who's read the book, who is looking forward to reading the book, everyone who has so warmly and enthusiastically embraced these characters beyond anything I ever could have imagined when this book first came out. So just wanted to thank all the readers and everyone listening right now.
Okay, go ahead.
I have some college friends, and we have set up during the pandemic a book club, and I asked them to read this book for the book club. So you have a whole bunch of people who now are big fans of yours who've read the book, and I'll be talking to them next month about it. You're welcome to join.
What's really cool is that in our Facebook group, we have watch parties. So if people can't join us tonight, I find that people go back and then do a watch party with their book clubs and share it. So that's really nice. And I would like to thank all of our readers. We had so much great feedback. Today, there was people furiously joining our book club. And we just had a barrage of people coming in to be part of this book. So I'd like to thank our readers. I'd like to thank Carla and Brit. You guys were amazing guests, and I'd like to say goodnight, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you. Thanks. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Brit. Thanks, Donna.
Thank you.
Cheers to you both.